Hi there. In this video, we'll be covering how to write a family history book. Your family story is one of triumph and tragedy, of ups and downs, of determination and grit. It can be so meaningful to document your family's story and preserve it for future generations. You want this story to live on and carry forward, and a book is the perfect way to do so. I've helped to write numerous family history projects, and I'm always moved by the emotions and the feelings and the truth that emerge. By the end of this video, you'll learn how to do research in your family, how to gather interviews, how to choose the right structure for your book, and how to write your story in an engaging way. And stay tuned until the end of the video for an opportunity I really think you're going to enjoy. Let's dive in. I think it's awesome that you're interested in preserving your family story. It can be so meaningful, so touching to be able to document that story. I think of the multiple people I've worked with on family history projects. I'm a book ghostwriter by trade, and I would say half a dozen of my clients have been people who are interested in telling their family story. A lot of times they're successful people. They've run businesses, they've achieved success in their life, and over time they've been interested in looking backward and going back and looking at how they got to where they are and how their relatives got to where they got to. It can be so meaningful to look back and see over the course of generations how your family has evolved and transformed and grown and moved. Life is not a static thing. Life is constantly moving, and we can learn so much from looking back at our relatives and looking back at the ups and downs that they faced. As with any book, you really have to think about who your book is for and what it's about. When you think about telling your family's story, you're probably going to pick and choose different relatives who really stand out. There are people who kind of carried things forward, and there's also these challenges that we face. Sometimes relatives aren't well defined in terms of documentation, in terms of records, in terms of interviews and remembrances. So it's challenging sometimes, but I think sometimes those challenges present opportunities for us and help to give us the answer on what kind of story we're telling. When I think of purpose, I often think of the ability to remember, the ability to capture this story for the future, for your children and grandchildren. You want people to be able to look back and think about where their relatives came from, the lives that they lived, the struggles they faced. The challenges they faced in some ways are very similar to the challenges we face today, and in some ways are very different. So it's really meaningful to be able to think about that. You want to think about who your audience is because you want to write to them. You want to speak in a way that they can understand. You want to break the story down in a way that's digestible and meaningful. You don't want to write a story that no one reads. You want to write a story that resonates, that carries forward. Once you think about that, I want you to think about the scope. Again, this isn't about documenting every single person and every single detail. It's about picking and choosing what are the things that matter the most. I think about a project I'm currently working on involving a family whose relatives came to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s and settled in New Jersey. And that first generation was really difficult and challenging, of finding their way, of just establishing themselves in the United States, of surviving. It was a survival mode for that first generation. That was really difficult. There were people in this family who were living on the street at times because they were impoverished, they had poor opportunities, they had falling outs with relatives, like they were bad circumstances and tragedies that happened. So you really need to pick and choose who your main characters are. What is the scope? What are the things that you're focused on? Because you could go deep and tell everything and write a book that no one wants to read. You want to write a book that people want to read and it's going to carry forward. So you really need to pick and choose, like, who are the key characters? Who are the people that you're focused on? And what are really 2 or 3 messages that you want to translate and that you want to carry forward throughout the pages? Once you do that, I want you to think about research. The things that you can gather, the information that is possible to obtain. You're not going to be able to find everything, but there's so much available that can help you fill in gaps and tell the story. The first thing is really thinking about things available to the family. Are there records that were kept through the years? Are there documentation of where they lived, of successes, of opportunities? There's libraries that we can go to and look for things. Nowadays, there's so much that's digitized, it's making the ancestry research process so much easier. One process is ancestry.com. It has so much information. There's census records up to 1950. It has city directories. It has yearbooks, school yearbooks. It has some newspapers. It has gravesite, cemetery records. There's so much information on ancestry.com. That's a great place to start. Another repository, another resource that is huge for ancestry research is newspapers.com. Newspapers.com has digitized so many newspapers, so many local, regional, national newspapers from the United States and across the world. And because of that, it's so easy to now find things. A generation ago, when I was doing newspaper research, I would have to go to the library and I would have to search on microfiche or microfilm, basically filtering through, turning these dials back and forth, trying to find that one little thing, and hoping that you find it. It's like a needle in a haystack. You kind of have to understand what you're looking for and then go to the right page. Nowadays, I can literally search for a name. I can search for a different specific date range. I can search for location by city, county, or state, and find what I'm looking for in a matter of seconds. It has transformed research of archived newspapers. You can also find PDFs of newspapers on different local sites, often through libraries. So digitization of newspapers has really helped in this process. And if you're thinking about telling your family's story, that's a great place to look, because there's probably newspapers and research that's been printed online that's going to help you just make this so much easier. Another thing you want to do is to interview people who are still around, who have stories to tell, who can connect those pieces. You don't want to just tell your story based on public data and government records. You want to go deeper. Your family story is about the stories. It's about layers. It's about details. Those things are typically not going to be found in newspapers and in census records. You're going to find those details in the storytelling. This is about storytelling, and you want to capture those elements in interviews. It's so important to be able to keep people on track. This isn't just an open forum, to be able to talk about whatever you want. This is really structured. It's a structured guidance thing where you're asking them specific questions about specific people and trying to elicit answers that are going to help you tell this story. I think back to the family that I'm working with that's telling their story from the 1900s on forward, and they did a video interview, which was really meaningful, about 5 years ago, from different relatives, some of whom are no longer with us. And we're able to capture some stories. So those stories were able to add some layers, some description, some richness to the story. You want to understand what that kitchen smells like when, the relative was cooking. You want to understand the smell of the cigar. You want to understand, the color of this car. You want to describe things in those vivid details because you want to take the reader back. You want to take them into those rooms. You want to put them in those spaces. You want to take them there. You can't take them there unless you go to those places, and you can't go to those places unless you have those stories collected and gathered. So you really need to interview. You need to gather as many stories as you can. And sometimes it's a matter of getting the stories from, the people who are still here but can remember what they were told from their grandparents or their parents. So go as deep as you can in being able to be vividly telling these stories. Through that research, through the interview process, you're really going to settle on who the most important people in the story are, who your main characters are. And a lot of times, the information that you have is going to make that process easier. I think back to the family project I'm working on now, and one of the reasons why we chose one specific character as the main character of the story is because we have letters of his from 1928 between his eventual wife, back and forth for a year. Those letters tell a story. We also have a reflection that he gave about his life that was 10 or 15 pages long in the 1970s. So we have these two different touch points of him being able to reflect on his life. We've been able to elevate that character and bring his stories effectively to life because he's written them, because we've been able to take them and gather them and mix them up with all these interviews that we've done and take that to the next level. So you really need to think about, the story you're telling, the characters that you're bringing through, and really taking all the stuff you've gathered and assembling it. I think about one project I worked on with a friend of mine, Rich, and Rich's story was very layered and complicated. And it involved multiple people across multiple generations. So he had stories about his father and his mother. He had stories about other people in his family and himself. And we actually designed the sections of the book based on those characters. So section 1 was focused on his dad. And when section 1 was coming to a close, it was the moment that he met his eventual wife. So then section 2 is about the mom. And then section 3 is about Rich, and onward and onward. And that allowed us to write this book in such a powerful way, structure-wise. The project that I'm currently working on, from the 1900s on forward, we're going decade by decade and really focusing on what the story is from the 1930s, the 1940s, and 1950s, and pairing that with changes in life. You know, what is changing in their life, what is changing in the life of the country. You know, how does this all fit together? Putting things in the context is so meaningful. And again, once you figure out the most powerful structure, then it's about layering those details in. It's about telling the stories in the most vivid, exciting way. The way that that relative would tell it. You know, when your relative would tell the story and everybody would be just stuck on every single word and laughing and drawn in, you want to tell it in those ways. You want to tell it so powerfully that it just pops off the page. You really need to do that, and you need to use those stories and use those vivid descriptions to carry the action forward. There's a lot of ups and downs across multiple generations and decades, so you really need to figure out, you know, how to keep the energy moving. This isn't about documenting every single thing that happened. It's about picking and choosing the best stuff and telling a coherent story. By focusing on those stories, by focusing on the vivid details, by focusing on the elements that carry across the generations, you know, you can really bring this family story forward in such a powerful way. If you're interested in learning more about how to write a family history book, I'd love to talk to you. I myself have helped authors just like you to write about half a dozen family history projects, and it's been so meaningful every single time to see everything that shakes loose and just the impact that it can have to document your family story. So if you're interested in documenting your family story and getting this told the right way, head to my website. It's goodghostwriter.com. You can click the link below and let's talk. Let's schedule a call and discuss your family story, and I'd love to learn more. Remember, a good book can change your life. I'm Dan Good. Thanks for watching.